Let's get it. This is Life's Essential Ingredients with Jeff and a Mike, where we hope to inform, inspire, and transform lives, one essential ingredient at a time. Welcome to the show. And Pastor, every time I hear Wayne just cutting that up right there for our intro, I just love it. And today, holy smokes, ladies and gentlemen, season 3, episode 2, we got Brenden Kumarasamy coming from Montreal, Canada. And if you think of the words of our introduction, we hope to inform, inspire, and transform. I mean, that's just deep in itself. And if you really take a second just to think about what those words mean, and then I would highly suggest that you get out a pencil, a pen, and paper, because that's what our guest does. And I think he helps people overcome some of the biggest challenges in their lives. And so again, first thing where you can find our guest, he's got a few spots, but it's rockstarcommunicator.com. mastertalk.ca. And then I know he likes sending people to his YouTube site, which his channel is just Master Talk. So about our guest, Brenden is the founder of Master Talk, a coaching business he started to help ambitious executives and business owners to become top 1% communicators in their industries so they can accelerate their success in the workplace and for their companies. Brenden has coached executives from companies like Salesforce, Amazon, IBM, Morgan Stanley, Blue Cross, J. Walter Thomas, Deloitte, and Verizon. And Brenden lives his purpose, one communication lesson at a time. And Brenden understands that audience members need to walk away captivated and, above all, inspired to master the art of communication. Public speaking should be seen as something to look forward to rather than a burden that must be overcome. Brenden, thanks for sharing your gift with the world, and welcome to the show.
Jeff, Mike, that was a killer introduction. Thanks so much for having me on. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, it's going to be a good one. It's going to be a good one. And Brenden doesn't know, but we always start with a thought of the day. And this one is so fitting. I don't know what the weather is in Montreal, but in actually all of California, we've been getting hit hard. So this one is about the weather a little bit, and it's from Albert Camus. And here it is. In the depth of winter, I finally learned that within me, there lay an invincible summer. Why would I pick that for you?
That's a fascinating
deep. I'll give you a second to think about that, because this, I'm going to read it one more time and allow you to get your thoughts. In the depth of winter, I finally learned that within me, there lay an invincible summer.
For me, Jeff, what that means is in our life, we are all uniquely designed as human beings. We have a purpose. We have something that only we can give to the world. And the reason I'm so confident in that, you too, is that there's only one version of us that will ever exist. So that by definition implies that there's something exceptional about us. But, and there's a big but, most of us are not willing to go into the depths of winter to find that invisible summer, to find what that gift is. Because for me, the depths of winter, because I hate the winter, so I guess you picked correctly with me, is like darkness. Are you willing to ask the really difficult questions of life and to really pull within to find what that gift is? And for me, I always thought my whole life I was going to be an accountant. That was my mission. That was my goal, to get out of poverty. I wasn't looking to fulfill my purpose or change the world. But then later in my life, what I found was that Master Talk ended up being a unique gift that I could share with the world. But the only reason I got to that point relatively early in life is because I was willing to go into the depths of winter to find it.
I told you, you should be having a pen and paper already, just dropping some knowledge with some depth. But why is it that you think people aren't willing? What gets in the way of us as a species of just sitting and marinating and sitting in the dark and sitting in the cold and experiencing the winter? What is it from your expertise and your experience that gets in the way of that?
You know better than me, Jeff, but we both know the answer to it, which is right at the top, which is our brain. Our brain is not wired for happiness. It's wired for survival. And what is the best way to survive? The best way to survive is not to go against the grain, guys. The best way to survive is to do what everyone else expects us to do. Because millions of years ago, if we didn't do what others expected us to do, we would die because the tribe would kick us out and there's no way of surviving, which is no longer the case anymore. So I'm actually very empathetic to this, to all of this, as to why most of us don't go into the depths of our darkness, into our winters, to find the truth that we want to actually do, because that truth implies that we must do something with our life that is uncommon. It implies that we must do something with our life that most people are not willing to do. That's why, if you want to be in the top 1% of anything, you must be willing to do what 99% of people aren't willing to do. But you know what I find fascinating about all this, you two, is that the people we admire in society are the people who did that. They went into the depths of winter, they found something, whether it's Leonardo DiCaprio's insane way of acting in a movie, or whether it's the way that Kobe Bryant used to wake up at 4 a.m. in the morning and do these crazy things, practicing to be the best basketball player. But I think the lesson is we see the people that we admire, but we don't do what they do, so we get the results that everyone else gets for survival.
Mm. Man, that's deep. And I love, you don't know, but Mike and I both played college basketball. We're roommates from University of San Francisco. Mike's 6'7", I'm 6'8". And so I definitely am loving you bringing Kobe in, because we've been coaches. You know, we played at a high level, and then we've been coaches for 20 something years. And Kobe, you know, would shoot over the summer. And this is a hard thing. This is like in the depth of winter for what you're talking about. And people don't understand this. Kobe would shoot 5,000 threes over the summer each day. And if you know anything about basketball, you're like, there's no way, that's impossible. I would do this 3-week challenge when I was coaching at Davis High School over the summer. And I had to do it before I got up for work. But I would only shoot 500 threes from the high school three. And the NBA three is a lot further. My arm was ready to fall off. And I know Kobe would spend about 8 hours, and he would get up crazy early and then take a quick break and then go back and then do. But it's like, yeah, that's sitting in the depth. And that's just why I'm so excited to have you on the show, because that's the top, 1%. Of people being willing to do that. And I think too, and no knock against the team that I'm coaching, but I'll speak specifically for youth right now, is I think a lot of them want to get into the winter, but they just don't know how. And I don't know if they have enough people trying to guide them, to help them, such as yourself, with, in this case, communication, with how do you learn to sit in the cold and the dark, and to do it the right way, where you can get the transformation of your mind, body, and spirit. And then, like you said, go on and use the gift. We are unique. We all do have something special to offer this world, but can we let that come out? And so, yeah, I'm fired up for this episode. But let's get into you. And it's always just a broad question. You take it any which way you like. But what was life like growing up?
For sure, Jeff. Very well articulated, by the way. I loved your thoughts earlier. Very good. So for me, what it was like growing up. So I grew up in Montreal, in a city in Canada. And for those who don't know, Montreal is a city where you need to know how to speak French. So I didn't grow up with a lot of money either. My parents, both of them, were factory workers. And the reason they sent me to French school as a little kid is because they wanted me to master the language so that I could get a great job in the city. Because my parents immigrated probably in the early 90s from Sri Lanka to Canada. And I was the first generation to be born in a first world country, which I only realized was really crucial probably when I was around 15 or 16. But when I was younger, I fought back a lot against my parents. I don't want to go to French school, but my parents forced me to. And I'm so glad they did in retrospect. But because of that, I had a lot of challenges with my communication. And the reason is a few things. One, because I couldn't speak the language. I couldn't present in it. So it was very embarrassing for me. The second piece is I have a crooked left arm because of a surgery I had when I was younger. So I had a crooked arm presenting, and I still do. So it causes anxiety. And then, of course, when I got older, I didn't know that my tie was supposed to end at my belt. So I clearly was lost because I knew nobody in the business world. So it took me many years to figure it out and caused me a lot of stress growing up.
Well, I appreciate you sharing and letting us know what's going on with your arm. I did see that on one video that I was watching. And I guess I'll just go there with the first question is how would you guide your client or somebody that's listening that has some anxiety over a physical kind of challenge that they have? How did you learn to overcome that and be like, man, hey, this is who I am. This is part of my gift that I have to be able to share. What advice would you give to somebody?
And the answer is exactly within the question. So good on that, Jeff, which is realize that it is a gift. I think the reason is I have a crooked left arm now is because it gives the people around me no excuses to master their communication skills, right? I think it's just one piece of the puzzle. It's like, well, if I'm a great communicator and clearly I don't really care much about my arm because I got two of them and some people have one or none, like Nick Vujicic. I always mispronounce his name. He's like a Serbian guy who's like a very, very, very successful motivational speaker. That guy doesn't have arms and legs. So what do I have to complain about? But I think the answer to all of this is really momentum. So for me, I think the reason, going back to the earlier point, Jeff, that you made around some people want to go into the depths of the winter, but they don't know how, is I would argue that's especially true with communication because the information that is being shared is awfully vague. So the way that I think about it is communication is like juggling 18 balls at the same time, where one of those balls is eye contact. One of those balls is getting rid of your ums and ahs, smiling, storytelling, body language. But now the next piece becomes, what are the 3 easiest balls to juggle? Because if you can do what's easy first, it builds up that confidence. And the first of those balls, as an example, is the random word exercise. So even if you're anxious around communication, just do the random word exercise. Pick a random word like phone, like laptop, like ceiling, and create random 60-second presentations alone in your basement. And that will improve your communication skills, even if you're not presenting to an audience.
So a little bit like improv, kind of just doing your thing. I'm gonna let my apostle, you got him all fired up. I love it.
Yeah, but I have a question on that because that's one of the biggest fears of everyone is speaking in front of people. Do you find that that's the first hurdle people have to overcome even before all these exercises? And how does someone overcome that?
For sure, Mike. So definitely the exercise helps because it proves to us when we do the random word exercise 10, 20 times that we get better really quickly. So there's momentum in the game. The other piece, Mike and Jeff, is to realize and acknowledge that there's always going to be some anxiety. It's normal. Like, I'll give you an example with me. There's always a level where we're scared of communication. Like, let's say we were all getting lunch in North Carolina or something like that. And we're eating and Elon Musk calls me. And he goes, hey, Brenden, I really like what you did with Jeff and Mike the other day. Really love your YouTube channel. Can you coach me? I'll pay you $3 million. Would I be worried? Would I be stressed out? Yeah, I would be, even if I've coached a lot of people. And that's okay. So the fear, the anxiety is not something we should try to remove. It should be a dichotomy that we learn to manage, a relationship that we learn to manage, kind of like a marriage. So I'll give you an analogy here. I call the boxing match analogy. So one side of the ring, Mike, is the anxiety, the fear around communication, the I don't want to do it, this sucks. And the other side of the ring is the message. Why is this important for us to share with the world? The goal is not for the fear to leave the ring, but rather make sure that when your message and your fear meet in the middle of that boxing match, that your message wins the match, that your message gets the knockout punch. In the same way, I didn't want to make YouTube videos. I was a kid when I started Master Talk, and to be honest, I still am one, just a little bit more successful. But I think the difference is I did it for the 7-year-old girl who couldn't afford a communication coach. That's what drove me to take action, and that was way more important than any fear it was associated with.
I love it. I love it. Such good advice already. So how do you put yourself in a position to achieve the 1%? And so specifically, I'm asking you, the show is called Life's Essential Ingredients. So obviously you're a performer. Every time you're looking at of going out and doing what you do, you have to perform. You have to be on top of your game, just like Kobe. So how do you stay on top of your game? What are some of your life's essential ingredients that allow you to be up there?
For sure, Jeff. I would say there's two perspectives. One that I think makes more sense for the general public, and then the top 1% category, which is a lot more difficult. So let's start with the first piece, which is what can all of us who are listening to this podcast do on a consistent basis that 99% of people just aren't willing to do? So I call this my easy threes. So we touched upon the first one, which is the random word exercise. Pick a random word, create presentations out of thin air. So book 5 minutes in your calendar every single day and just do it 5 times a day. You can do this with your kids. You can do this in the shower. You can do this in the car. Just do it and run with it. Exercise number 2. The question drill. We get asked questions all the time in our lives, Jeff and Mike, all the time, on a podcast, at work, at school, from our families. But most of us are reactive to those questions. We're not proactive. I'll give you an example with me. Like a few years ago, I really sucked at podcast guesting because I was just getting started. So I remember some guy asked me, where does the fear of communication come from? And I looked at him and I was like, I don't know, man, California, Los Angeles, London, you tell me. So I wasn't sure how to answer the question. So every day for 5 minutes, all I did was I answered one question that I thought the world would ask me about my expertise, my products, or my services. So day 1 was, how do I overcome my fear of communication? Day 2 was, how do I ask better questions? Day 3 was, how do I speak better in meetings? But if you do that every single day for 5 minutes for a year, you'll have answered 365 questions about your industry. You'll be bulletproof. And then the last exercise, make a list of 10 people you love the most in your life. And every day, just send 20-second voice notes or video messages to just express your gratitude for them. And the only rule in sending the video is you're not allowed to retake the video. That's it. Easy threes.
I love it. I love it. And it just goes back, we'll just keep applying it to basketball because it's universal. But you want to be good, at your craft. You got to get reps in. And listen, these are 3 incredible ideas to share with the listeners and to help everybody be in the top 1% of their craft. But man, you want to be able to knock down a 3-point shot. Well, you got to get into the gym with the correct coach, with all the right technique. And it kind of goes back to sitting in the depths of winter, back to that quote of, am I practicing the right way? And that's what's, I think, a huge disconnect as well, is I think everybody wants to be good. Everybody wants to be at that top 1%, but can they surround themselves with people that can allow them to get there and practice in the right way? Because another thing, when you said bulletproof, I just see self-confidence. I see self-efficacy, but it's like, sometimes people are putting in that work, but we're just not working smart and not working in the right way, which is why I think coaching is just blown up with people such as yourself, because people are realizing, hey, you know what? It's not easy. And let me go to what I would call the guru, Brenden, and let me help him help myself through his work become the best. But I do want to get specific. I loved how you applied that to the listeners and what they can do. But what do you do? So what's your day look like in your life's essential ingredients? So when you are sitting there with Elon Musk and you're not so anxious that you're like, hey, I've done my routine, because it's kind of goes back into getting in that right space that we're talking about. So how do you do that specifically?
For sure, Jeff. So for me, for communication, I play a different game, which is I do exercises that I don't recommend most people do right now. So let me start with, are we applying those 3 tips on a daily basis? I have never met a single human being in my life, Jeff and Mike, not one, who was sending video messages, who was doing the question drill, 1 question a day, and doing the random word exercise continuously. So I don't do those exercises anymore because I've mastered them. So the random word exercise, I've done it like 3,000 times. question drill I'm practicing right now, actually. So if you do 5 to 7 interviews a day, or 10, or sometimes I do 15, you're getting asked like 100 questions in a day. So that takes care of itself. And then the video messages, I probably sent 70 like during the holidays, and I do probably 5 to 10 on every week on average. So that's the simple stuff. The more advanced game for me personally is doing things that most people, even other coaches in my industry, aren't willing to do. So I'll give you a few examples that I do sporadically throughout the week. One is called The Moth, which is an underground storytelling organization. So what I do is I pull up the stories that they write that are usually traumatic in nature about their life, and I present the story as if I'm them. So that really helps me embody the emotion of someone who's been through that experience, and helps me elevate my technique to a category of one. That's one piece. And I don't know a single executive in the corporate space who does that. The second one is I rap very consistently. I don't have a career in rapping by any means, but I like to look at different verses because it helps me enunciate my words and pronounce them really good. And the third thing that I do is I karaoke in languages I don't know. So I speak 3 languages, but I can karaoke in 8. And I don't understand those languages, neither do I sing well. But if you can communicate, let's say, Italian or Spanish or Japanese, it's really easy for you to pronounce words in English. So that's kind of the wacky stuff I do at the highest level, but I don't recommend that for most people getting started.
Yeah, deep. Hey, let's get into some of the specifics then about communication. And I'll let you jump into, but, roughly, body language, tone, just pace, energy, of kind of validating or matching, kind of what the group, I don't know. I have no idea about it. I just talk. I'm no expert, but you get into, what are some of those things that people can perhaps be a little bit more aware of to help themselves?
For sure, Jeff. So let's go back to the 18-ball analogy. To your point, it's hard to explain because communication, I think before me, was really vague. And I'm still working really hard to make it as concrete as possible. Like, is it tone? Is it body language? So let's go back to those 18 balls. So the first 3 balls are like we discussed, the random word exercise, which is ball 1. Doing the question drill on a daily or consistent basis, and sending video messages. If you just do these 3 things and you pay attention to nothing else, you're going to be ahead of your industry by a lot. And that's why I always say if you communicate 20% better than your competition, you will stand out 100% of the time. And that definitely applies here. Just doing those little actions consistently, kind of like in basketball, where the biggest thing you need to work on is the foundations. You're building up a skill set that most people never get to. That's why Kobe always differentiated himself, just because he put in more time. Very simple. Now let's get to the other balls. Let's go to ball 4. Ball 4 is called puzzle. So puzzle is just a technique and how people can practice and structure speeches in a way that's actually really easy to think about from a visual perspective. So let's think about this. When we think about jigsaw puzzles, those toys we used to play as kids, most of us, we start with the edges whenever we work on one. It's got a bunch of pieces everywhere. You take the corner pieces, you put them together. Why? The reason is because those pieces are easier to put together and they're easier to find in the box. Pretty simple so far, right? But now the question is, why don't we do that in speaking? Because most of the time when we prepare a presentation, it could be for work, it could be for school, we generally do the opposite, which is we shove a bunch of content in our presentations. We get to the presentation and it sounds something like this. Thanks. Not the right approach. So instead, the next time you're preparing a presentation or a speech, you do use puzzle. Start with the edges first. Practice just your speech intro, just the intro, 25 times, 30 times. Sounds like a big number, but the introduction is like 2 minutes max. So this will only take you an hour to do. Same thing with the conclusion. What's a great movie with a terrible ending? Last time I checked, terrible movie. So do the same thing with the close. 20 to 25 times, and then tackle the middle, and your ability to practice for presentations will be 10 times more efficient and effective.
Man, great tips. And would you apply that to, you hear so much now just about being a storyteller. Would you put that puzzle I kind of see that in the way that you're talking about that. But how do you help your clients learn how to tell their story? Am I asking the same thing that you just talked about?
No, you're totally fine, Jeff. It's a great question. So storytelling is more like ball 15. The reason is because, and I'm happy to still comment on it, obviously. And the reason is because if you don't have the right foundations, so going back to this ball analogy, balls 5 to 10 is what I call the 5 levels of speech, which is simply smiling, saying no filler words, pausing, right? Ball number 3 in that 5 levels of speech then becomes vocal tone variety. Then it's pacing. Then after that, it's putting it all together. So just to recap, because I know we're overwhelming the audience a little bit here. Ball 1 is the random word exercise. Ball 2 is question drills. Ball 3 is sending video messages on a consistent basis to the people that we love. Ball 4 is realize that the best way to speak is to speak. So are we doing those 3 things consistently? It's kind of like a PR piece. Like if you don't do them, you can't move on. Then ball number 5 is really puzzle. Then ball 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 is the 5 levels of speech. Then we get into storytelling. But here's the point I want to drive. If you don't have the basics, you can't tell stories. Like, I'll give an example. So once upon a time, I was sitting on my couch when I was 5 years old. So you notice how if you don't have the right foundations, it doesn't matter how good the story is. But there is a lesson that I'll teach really quick. Les Brown explains this best. Never make a point without telling a story, and never tell a story without making a point. What does that mean? That means that great stories start with the lesson first in mind. So what you want to do is you want to write a bunch of things that you want to teach people. Then you circle the one that you want to teach the most, and then you find stories in your life or people around you or other people that help you learn that lesson. So an example with me is, what's one lesson I want to teach? That any human being can be a great speaker. So how do I prove that best? I try 10 different stories, but the one that lands is my own challenges. Okay, I have a broken left arm. It's there. It's right there, right? I started this when I was a kid. I barely knew how to speak French and present in it. So if I could do it, anyone can.
I'm going to totally change that. Man, it's just so good. I love all these tips, and I love the 18 balls. It's so, my mind just works. I guess maybe it's a basketball coach, or maybe just how I teach, but I'm a step guy, step 1, 2, 3. And I just, such a good visual for me to see those 18 balls that you're juggling. And yeah, it's so fun too. Of you're using the word basics, just fundamentals, basketball. And I think you use the word foundation as well. But I want to get in to something different and totally change the whole conversation. Is I know you're big in listening to you about giving back. And I know you are passionate about the water crisis situation. Tell the listeners about why that's important to you. I think that was kind of cool in hearing that you're passionate about that.
For sure, Jeff. I really get asked that question, so I appreciate it. So here's my perspective in life, which might add some perspective to how people can potentially live theirs. So I'm a big believer of this quote. I believe that the easiest way to solve the world's problems is to do just that. Focus on the easiest ones first. So I'll repeat that again. The easiest way to solve the world's problems, I believe, is to do just that. Focus on the easiest ones first. So I think all of us should spend our life solving 2 problems in the world. One that we're uniquely positioned to solve, and the second one is the one where we ask ourselves, what is the world's easiest problem to solve? Because the challenge is we focus too much on passion, but we can be passionate about a lot of things, and we can have a very heated debate around that. But you can't really debate what the easiest problem is. So we can all focus our energy on just solving that and moving on to the next one. That's why my whole life is just dedicated to 2 things. 1, solve communication for the world. How do we democratize that information in a way that Dale Carnegie wasn't able to because he didn't have access to the technologies and the means that we have today? So that's my life mission. And thankfully for me, I got a head start. So let's see if it works out. The other piece is the water crisis. I believe the lack of water in the world is actually the easiest problem to solve for, because it's already been solved for 90% of the human population. So it's now just about getting to that bottom 10% that capitalism can't solve for. So that's why I partner a lot with Scott Harrison's organization, Charity Water, because I think he has the most brilliant management team that are working on the water crisis. And they've already helped 15 million people get access to clean water, which is a massive number. That's like 1.5% of the entire problem as one org. So I spend a lot of my time with Charity Water, helping them and leading their executives to communicate better as well.
Man, I love it. I love it. And I don't know if you're aware, we're not solving any world problem, but Life's Essential Ingredients is part of a nonprofit called C4 Leaders. And we now, with COVID, use pizza as a way to try and build community and bring people together. And so Mike and I are, that's kind of a big part of what we do to give back and try and make a difference in the world locally, to try and just help bring people and bring the table. We have a pizza truck that has a really cool piece of art that's a wood-fired pizza oven that we bring the table to the people. And then we just gather around and celebrate each other and realize that we just have this one life to live. And can we communicate and listen and come together to get the most that we can out of this day. So yeah, I appreciate you taking that challenge to lend your expertise to solving both of those huge problems. I do want to get back to communication. And where does listening, come in? We've been talking about all these techniques on how to craft your message and everything, but how important is it to listen? And how do you work with your clients to help them be better at that?
For sure, Jeff. And thanks for the work that both of you are doing. Super interesting. And now I'm jealous that I don't get any pizza, so I'll definitely have to come up to one of these trucks.
You're always welcome, California. And I'm sure you do work out this way. But yeah, I'm close to San Francisco. Mike's in LA, so you got a spot. Anytime you come out, always welcome.
Love that. Yeah, I am in LA quite a bit, so I'll definitely take you guys up on that. So for the communication, right? Listening. So here's the way that I think about this. We all know that listening is important, right? Epictetus always says, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth for reasons. We can listen twice as much as we speak, but there's not really any practical tips around it. So let me share one that has been helpful to me, which is called statements versus questions. So statements versus questions. A lot of us in our life, Jeff and Mike, we spend our time asking, or rather stating, many statements. So let's say two people are talking, it usually sounds something like this. I believe this. Well, I believe that. Well, I believe this. Oh, I believe this. Well, this is important to me. Well, that's important to me. So it's always a ping-ponging of statements. Whereas what exceptional communicators do is that they often replace their statements with questions. So let's say somebody goes, I believe this. We reply with, why is that important to you, Jeff? Why do you believe this? What is something about your argument that you feel I'm missing in mine? So we're replacing statements with questions. So the answer is really simple. Just ask yourself every single day, how many questions am I actually asking to the world? What is the ratio between the questions and the statements that I'm putting out in the world? And we'll find out pretty quickly, if we did this audit, that most of us only ask 0, 1, or 2 questions on a daily basis to other people. So I would just encourage people listening to this podcast to bump that up. 3 questions, 4 questions, 5 questions a day. Because if we do that, our listening will automatically improve because we're putting ourselves in an environment where we have to listen.
Yeah. I love that. And I don't know, I find we're just a little bit more distracted with the 24/7 piece of always kind of being on. Do you offer advice for your clients of learning how to rest? I mean, I don't know if that sounds crazy to you or not, but I think to be a good communicator, to be a good listener, I just think it's another skill, getting that rep of learning how to rest so you can be prepared to listen and communicate and work on your craft. Do you have any insight on helping people learn how to rest?
That's a great thought, Jeff. I've never really considered that, actually. You're the first podcaster ever to ask me a question around rest. I think what I will say now, there's probably experts who are better than me at that, like Matt Walker. I've only recently started sleeping 8 hours a day, probably in the last 3 years. I will say it is important. I have nothing super interesting to add, but I think what I will say on that question is my frame has always been, how do we make communication as easy, fun, and exciting as possible, so that way less rest is often required. So I'll give you an example with the questions. How can we spice that up? Let's say in your pizza parties, you guys can do this. I always love making a list of questions that I wished other people asked me, and I just ask that to other people. So for example, if you ever met me in person, you don't ask me what the weather is like. It doesn't matter. I don't care about the weather. But asking questions like, hey, what's your purpose? What are you excited about building this year? What are you grateful for today? What's interesting in your life? Something like that. That, even despite all of the noise in our society, is much easier for us to listen to, because we actually want those questions to be asked to us. And what often happens in conversation is when we ask those questions, most people aren't very good at asking questions. So they just reply with, what about you? So you just get to answer your own questions, which is like a beautiful thing. So that's how I'd approach it.
I love it. I love it. Yeah. Again, I don't know. I don't want to get off topic. I'm just going to let that thought go. But I like to get insight from people at the top of their craft, of any books that you would recommend, just random, on anything that you read. You're like, oh my gosh, I got to share this with so many people, for the listeners out there.
For sure. The book that I gift the most is Thirst by Scott Harrison. So going back to charity water, the Scott is the person who started it. You know, they've raised like hundreds of millions of dollars now to help people with clean water. I think he's one of the most brilliant minds on the planet. And I also am super inspired by his book, because his story in a nutshell was, he was a nightclub promoter in his 20s, working in New York City. He had a miserable life. He had all the money in the world, all the cars, all the fame, but he hated his life. He was the worst person he knew. And that guy, of all people, went on to build America's largest water charity, which is wild. So I feel that story is not just redemptive, but it's inspiring for all of us, and really emphasizes a quote that he often shares in the book by Pope Francis, which is, all it takes to have hope in the world is one person. And why can't that person just be you? And I feel that's the key point of Thirst. And I highly recommend people check it out.
I love it, man. What a great, this two last, and that you're leading me to this quote. But I have 2 daughters, and I'm a nurse too. Not that it matters to you, but my wife's a nurse. My oldest daughter is a nurse, and my youngest daughter lives in Spain and teaches English. Aaliyah, big yo, I love you. If you're going to tune into this episode, but I'm going to share that she was sitting having a coffee, and I don't speak Spanish, so I'm hopefully not going to butcher this too much, but it's a quote from Mother Teresa. And it's, a veces sentimos que lo que hacemos es tan solo una gota en el mar, pero el mar sería menos si le faltara una gota. And what that means is kind of what you just shared. Sometimes we feel that what we do is just a drop in the sea, but the sea would be less if it lacked that one drop. And it's just powerful of realizing, back to kind of how this episode started, that we all have just that one drop to keep adding, and realizing that it is important. And so that's going to be the last thing I'm going to ask you, Brenden. I appreciate everything that you've shared on this episode. Is, what is it? John Austin has another quote. He said, the only thing you take with you when you're gone is what you leave behind. And you're a young man, probably in your mid-20s, and hopefully you got another 75 years left on your life. And I told you I'm a nurse, and I've sat at the bedside holding people's hand as they take their last breath. So I want you to visualize yourself surrounded by the people that have been in your life, that you've loved and that love you, and you're getting ready to take your last breath. What is it you want them to feel as that time happens?
Great question, Jeff. And thanks for the work that you do as well. It does matter, in case you were wondering, because you said it didn't. So thanks for the work and the impact you're creating in the world. I would say, for me, since you're asking for a feeling, not advice, I would say the one thing that I want the people around me to feel is relieved. Relieved that I was able to leave this world empty. Relieved that I did what I wanted to do in this world. Like if I died tomorrow, I don't think the people in my life would feel relieved for me. Oh, he didn't get married, didn't have kids, he didn't live up to the potential that he wanted to. He didn't get to give what he wanted to do in this life. But my hope is that at the end of the game, that people feel relieved. They'll still be worried, they'll still be sad, but they'll feel like, okay, he did what he had to do, and we're so happy that he got to leave that behind. I'm not there yet, but hopefully I will be there soon, and hopefully it doesn't take me 75 years either, or else I'll be cutting it close.
Oh man, what a great episode. We've been season 3, episode 2, Brenden Kumarasamy, coming from Montreal. Again, you can find him. It's the best place, Rockstar Communicator, mastertalk.ca, or your YouTube. I mean, is there any one that you like to direct people to?
For sure, Jeff. First of all, it was such a pleasure to be on the show. I know we didn't have a chance to talk too much, Mike, but you're a great listener, so you're a great example for me to follow. I would say there's 2 ways to keep in touch, for sure, to your point, Jeff. So one is definitely rockstarcommunicator.com. That's where I host my live Zoom workshop on communication. I do it every 2 weeks for the community. So you can see me apply a lot of these tips live on a Zoom call. So you get a lot more out of the learnings. And the second way to keep in touch is definitely the YouTube channel. Just go to Master Talk on YouTube and you'll find me for free over there too.
Nice. Pashito, get us out of here, baby. The good listener, the eye candy of the show. Man, you're looking pretty this morning. Let's go.
I'm the eye candy, Brenden. You don't have to laugh so hard. It's true. It's the only reason I'm here. But hey, I just want to say it is a pleasure. And thank you for everything you're doing. And I want everyone that's listening to just know when you're great at something, you make it sound easy and seamless. But I know how much work it takes to get to that point. And you made it look like it's cake and presented like no problem, easy. Appreciate that. And that's just how good you are, man. So thank you for that. And thank you for sharing and being on the show. Appreciate it.
Of course, Mike, Jeff. Thanks for having me.
All right. Hey, listeners, thank you for tuning in to another episode. You know how we do it when we get out. Boom, baby. That just happened. We out.